and eventually talked myself into doing it, because I think Christianity is important for Marxists. It's important mass organization. There's millions of people involved, and it still has a great deal of influence. And we have the theory that the class struggle goes on everywhere, within every organization, within every individual. And if there were more of us, we would want to be involved in the churches also, as well as other organizations. But, it's important even as a social phenomena, and we need to talk about it. So let me just talk, maybe not everybody knows it, and I don't know that much about it. The history of the church. As you know, it began with the birth of Jesus, who was basically a radical reformer, Jewish reformer. And incidentally, I want to just talk about the sources I've used. Somebody suggested I look at Ludwig Feuerbach, The Essence of Christianity. And it's, Feuerbach was part of this movement in the 19th century of Russian scholars, not Russian, German scholars, who were analyzing in a materialistic way the biblical texts and sort of demystifying them and making sense out of them and showing how the sort of the material basis of Christianity. But looking through it, I thought it was a little bit too much for this thing. So what I mostly looked at was Marx and Engels, this little collection of Marx and Engels on religion, and particularly and I think it's a nice collection, and it's sort of interesting and amusing and not too heavy, and I would recommend it. I think there's an edition in International Publishers too, a paperback edition somewhere. I had one, but I bought this. So it's a lot easier, and I would recommend these kind of texts for beginners more than the theoretical texts. It's a way of getting into the Marxism. Anyway, so a lot of the information I got from Engels, particularly the early Christianity, early Christian church. Anyway, one of the points that Engels makes there is that early Christianity, or radical Judaism at the time, was really not that much different from modern socialism. And it was a revolt against the oppressive conditions of the Roman Empire and the Jewish
I missed
clergy.
that word that you said. Can go back about 2 words.
Jewish.
I don't know which 2 words.
Okay, I know. It's just.
Well, maybe it'll any particular word.
Sorry
not
about
that
that.
important. Okay, so and he said, the difference between modern socialism and Christianity is that Christianity promised communism in the next world, and socialism promises socialism in this world. And it made me think, actually, there's even less difference, I've noticed, among many socialists, that actually they don't even believe in socialism in this world. It's always somewhere, and if they talk to anybody socialist, they'll say to you, and you ask them, they'll say to you almost with glee, "I'll never see socialism in my time." And it's always projected into well, many of them, not all of them, not us, of course, but other people we know, is always projected into the future somehow, and all these conditions that have to be met before it can happen. And so, for instance, when in my organization, I started to point out to people that, there's 30 to 50% of the U.S. population is for socialism now. And they would say, no, they don't understand that, and they don't really believe it. They just it's just a word to them. They would poo-poo it any, and you remember Lenin in middle of 1917, he came to the leadership of the Bolshevik Party and said, we can, now's the time, we can seize power. And he had a hard time persuading anybody. And some people tried to sabotage the whole thing. They said, no, we can't, this is not, we have to go through this bourgeois, blah, blah, blah. And there were all kinds of excuses.
Is that what Trotsky did?
Well, Trotsky's thing was a little bit later.
Okay,
but,
sorry.
Anyway, that's a whole other subject. And we should get into the Christianity. Anyway, it wasn't until the 4th century that Christianity sort of formed what it is now. I think there was something called the Council of Nicaea, Nicaea, which established the dogma and the organization of the church, and roughly the same time. Christianity became the state religion of the Roman Empire, and of course they dropped all this equality nonsense, and it became much more of a hierarchical organization, but still with these promises. And the next big thing was the division of the Roman Empire into and the sort of collapse of the Roman Empire into Rome and Constantinople, Eastern, and with it went the division of the Catholic Church and the what's called the Eastern Orthodox Church. And the Eastern Orthodox Church didn't do very well. Constantinople and many of the countries where that part of the empire were conquered by the Muslims, and they became Istanbul became a Muslim city, but they continued to survive and continued to exist, mostly more with a center in Moscow, which I was surprised to learn. And Moscow became the 3rd center of Christianity in a way. Anyway, so but getting back to, one thing about the Orthodox Church, it's come back into a little bit of prominence, partly because of the establishment of the Russia Today, but also recently the U.S. helped to engineer a split in the Orthodox Church around the Ukraine, because the Ukrainian church was tied into the Moscow church, and of course you couldn't have any Moscow Ruski influence in Ukraine, so they engineered a split. So it's a very political thing. At any rate, Catholicism became was the religion of the Roman Empire, and became the religion, the state religions of the country's successor, and it became an integral part of what became the feudal system, which it didn't just support the feudal system; it was an integral part of it. And in many countries, the church was a feudal lord with vast land holdings. And, the feudal system was basically a land-based agricultural system, and the church was a big landlord, and was organized in the same way as the feudal system, with a hierarchical structure, and the ideology was hierarchical. Your relationship in the individual was to the priest and the bishop and the blah blah blah, to the Pope, who was the Prince of God. It's something like that. He was the representative of God on earth. So, but of course, with that kind of hierarchical system and that kind of exploitative system, there was bound to be rebellions and schisms and so forth, which I won't go into it because I can't go into it. But I just jumped to the Reformation, and this was a revolt again of the poor and the oppressed against the corruption of the church, particularly, and
In what year?
I think it was 1600s, 1500s maybe, 16th century, and it was centered in Germany. Luther first, and then Luther, launched this rebellion against the clergy, and then he sort of chickened out and became, very much. There are very much a supporter of the clergy. He didn't want to go too far, and other clergy, rebellious clergy, took over, and they were executed and suppressed. But the Reformation had a big effect, and this is not exactly the Reformation, but in Britain, in England, Henry VIII abolished the Catholic Church. He not only broke the relations with Rome, but he burned down the monasteries. He confiscated all the lands of the Catholic Church, which was probably 40 or 50% of the land in England, and redistributed it. I'm not sure what happened in Europe, but I think something similar went on. But what was important was that this cleared the way. It destroyed feudalism. It began the destruction of feudalism and cleared the way for capitalism. And one point Engels makes is that Christianity was different from Islam in that revolts within Islam always never resulted in changing of the social order. But these revolutions within Christianity, this particular revolution, cleared the way for a new social order, which was capitalism. And the ideology of Protestantism was aligned with capitalism, with the spirit of capitalism. I think when I was a college student, I read Max Weber's Protestantism and the Spirit of Capitalism, something like that. And it's an interesting book, 19th century writer. At any rate, let me see if there's anything else I want to go into in the history. Okay, no, not really. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about, and this will be the other main point, is, I thought I had something, here it is, about skip to modern day and the Christian churches in the United States, and it's a vast subject. There's I think certainly about a vast majority of people in the United States, probably 80%, identify themselves as Christians, and but that's not the whole story. Oh, I had brought, I forgot to bring it, I lost it, an article, a paper that the Pew Research Foundation does on Christianity in the United States. And the headline of it is the turn away from Christianity is accelerating. It's getting fast, and they're almost gleeful about it. And I'm not sure why, because Pew is, very much that's big oil money. But at least those people, they think it's a bad thing, a good thing. Will seem to, but still, there's a lot of people involved, and there's a increase in the number of non-believers, atheists, and it's quite sharp in the last 10 years, last 20 years. Let me go into some figures. Well, let me line it out. Of course, there's the Catholic Church in the United States, which constitutes about 25% of the population. It's one of the largest and the wealthiest, and so forth. And its number of members has been more or less stable. If you look at the figures, it's gone from like 25% to 23%. But I looked at some other study, and they were went into more detail, and it doesn't look good, because there's a sharp drop in the number of congregations, a sharp drop in the number of priests. They can't recruit priests. The number of baptisms of children has gone down almost 50%. So somehow it's not renewing itself, but somehow keeping stable. Part of it, and I can only speculate, is immigration from Catholic countries where the remnants of feudalism still exist. And that's the basis of the Catholic Church in the United States. Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Poland, South America. These are all areas where feudalism and land-based economies have survived into the 20th century, and often, in some cases, the late 20th century, into the current era. So, and of course, the Catholic Church, because of its structure, is susceptible to these authoritarian trends, these trends for abuse, not just sexual abuse, but just general abuse. And it's gone on for a long time. It's not new, and financial corruption too. And there have been periodic reforms and attempts at reforms. For instance, so they changed popes periodically to like after World War II, there was Pope John the 22nd, who was this proletarian pope from Italy, who replaced the pro-fascist pope, because the fascists got defeated. And then more recently, this Benedict, the German pope, who thought that whose view of saving the church was to go to fundamentalism, hold tight, so forth. Oops. No, it's mine.
It's yours.
And he's now replaced by this more. I've got to decline now.
The time's up.
Yeah, time's up. Okay. I'll call back. But it basically things don't change. Okay. The second big area is what they call the mainline Protestant churches, and there's 7 of them. The Episcopal Church, which is the sort of the church of the upper classes, and is the spin-off of the Henry VIII's Church of England, and so the Anglican Church, and then also the Presbyterian Church, which is sort of Scottish, more Scottish, but also from England. And then the others, Methodist, United Methodist was more middle class, and the Evangelical Lutherans, the Disciples of Christ, and so on. And they were in 1965 there were 31 million Protestants, mainline Protestants. In 2005 it was down to 21 million, and this, you know, the overall population of the United States has also gone the other direction, 50% up since then. So it's a real drop, and then the other section, then they're the other sections of Christianity, Protestant, what is regarded as Protestant Christianity. They're the fundamentalists and the evangelicals, which are a big group, which are sort of all fundamentalists. They're well, I'll talk about it later, but I'll talk about what I think is going on in Christianity, and maybe with respect to them and with Catholicism. Then there are a couple of other things that I want to mention that I noticed. They're the mega churches. That's which I didn't realize is such a big deal. That is churches that have 2,000 or more people who attend every Sunday, sometimes as many as 10,000. And I think it's connected also to television, religion, and they're quite powerful and they're quite active politically, as you know. They've now been but they're a more working class or petty bourgeois church, and people of the mainstream Christians sort of look upon the mega churches as, you know, they're not real. They're Christianity light. They don't really do it. You know, they're not really serious Christians. They do a lot of feel good stuff. They don't make people feel bad about themselves. They do a lot of singing and so forth, and they have a lot of services. You know, not religious services like mortgage brokers and tax accountants and ways of helping people, and they form their. But it's a real thing. My former mother-in-law used to love the Crystal Church, which was in Southern California, in Orange County, where they had built this beautiful edifice out of glass, and
Not beautiful.
pardon?
It's not beautiful.
Well,
Some people do.
everybody has their own
It's
opinion.
just,
Everybody has their own opinion.
oh, is that right?
And you know, people talk, and I want to just talk about one other organization, and that's the Mormons, the Jesus Christ,
Oh, the
Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you know, they have kind of a unique ideology and kind of I don't know how to put it, but at any rate, it's very different. And some people, even in the Mormon Church, are not quite sure that they're a Christian church. But let's include them, and they're important, even though there's only 6 million Mormons in the United States. DSA has 40,000 members, the largest socialist organization. So there's quite a difference. There's two reasons why they're important. One, they accumulate capital. They've accumulated capital. They have a 10% tithe on everybody's income, and they enforce it. People have to give, larger, and so they've been able to accumulate enormous amount of capital. There just was a report put out just a few days ago that somebody discovered there's a investment management company in Salt Lake City controlled by the church that has $100 billion under assets. So the Mormon Church is a major capitalist ruling class entity. And secondly, and connected to that, they emphasize being involved in business. You know, George Romney, Mitt Romney, and so forth. And they do a lot of foreign evangelical missionary work. So a lot of their people are already have experience abroad. So they tend to get recruited into things like the CIA, the State Department, and that sort of middle layers of the ruling class. They have much more influence than their numbers would indicate. Sort of like the Jews, about the same number. You know, they're very small, but they have a lot of influence. And well, I want to just speculate on what's the reason for the decline in Christianity, and it's been going on not only here but in Europe. It's much more further advanced, and of course, Marxists we speculate that it's basically due to the spread of materialism, that the development of society. Objectively, and I'm not just talking about vulgar materialism, of course that's a factor too, but philosophical materialism, the idea that there's only a material world, there is no other universe. And that's sort of, you know, even without propaganda or education, well, Marxist education at least, it's spreading among the population spontaneously because of the development of the economy and society and the complexity of it, and the development of science and technology. And so this process is ongoing, and the Christian churches are trying to adapt to it, or are adapting to it, and part of it is this fundamentalist thing. We can hold on, and to some extent, with some people, it works. One Jewish friend of mine said, who became Orthodox, "You're in for a pound, you're in for a penny, and you're in for a pound." You join up these groups, and you buy the whole thing, and then you become part of the group. And it's very comforting. You know, one of the functions of religion is to provide comfort for people, and to, you know, so one of the fact, you know, what's happening, the Christianity, the churches, are an important pillar of capitalism. Incidentally, the Catholic Church converted itself into a capitalist organization rather than a feudal organization. It now has investments. It has banks. It has financial scandals. Everything. You know, the whole thing. And some of these other churches do too. But the fact of the decline, which is not as the crisis of Christianity is not as acute as the economy, but it is a crisis, and it's indication of the crisis of capitalism, and it's contributing to the crisis of capitalism too. And for the individual who previously would have found comfort in Christianity, they're forced to, like Marx said, confront the reality. You know, Marx, in the manifesto, they said, capitalism destroys all the old feudal links and forces the individual to face the reality of his own existence, of his fellow man. Well, that's sort of a process that's going on in a smaller scale among Christianity. But people who previously would have adhered to Christianity are now being forced to think about it. So that's that's what I'm going to put out there, and I hope other people who have more knowledge will contribute.
Can I just ask a clarification question?
Sure.